Hello everybody. Here on the channel, cars often come in waves. People will usually see me featuring one type of vehicle and then I'll get offered many similar. Just recently I featured an Oldsmobile 442, a real classic hunk of American metal. And off the back of that, I'm now going to be featuring a wave of old school American cars with the odd bit of new yank stuff thrown in for good measure. This current crop of cars have come to me courtesy of the very good people at Retro Classic Car in Swainby up in North Yorkshire. Now, when you think of American cars, for many people there is only one that springs to mind, the Mustang. And for many people there is really one classic Stang to rule them all. That's this, the Mach 1. This is a 1971 351 Mach 1. This is a sports roof car, what was previously called the fastback, that sloping roofline. And one thing which I really will struggle to do in video is to give you an idea of just how vast this car is. It's parked in a showroom next to a range of other American vehicles, so it looks about right in size, but this thing is absolutely massive. It doesn't help that you really cannot see a lot from in here either. Forward visibility is barely acceptable, rearward visibility is atrocious. Now, the particularly eagle-eyed might have noticed that I am in fact sitting on the right-hand side of the vehicle, and that's because this car is a right-hand drive conversion. Most unusually though, this car was actually imported new in 1971 to the UK and was pretty much immediately converted to right-hand drive by a specialist company here. Now, the details of all this car you'll find, along with many others, on the website of Retro Classic Car. And I've got to be honest, the Mach 1 is not a car that has appealed to me pretty much ever. In fact, driving a rear-wheel drive, high-powered, high-torque, poor visibility, American muscle car in this kind of weather isn't very high on my to-do list, but I'm here, so I'm going to get things done regardless of what the weather wants to do to me. I have to say, once you're on the move, driving this car is actually very easy. The steering is, of course, very light, and the engine has plenty of poke to get you moving down the road with even modest applications of the throttle. The brake pedal will proudly tell you that this car has disc brakes. Now we're doing about 40 miles an hour. Shall we see if they're any good? They're not. The car will sort of tip down, it'll slowly come to a halt, and it'll try and lock a wheel in the process. But in all honesty, I expected absolutely nothing less. And similarly for the wipers, which simply redistribute the water from one side of the screen to the other. But that's also not a problem, because I again expect nothing less. Things that I love in this car include this steering wheel, this beautiful little motor liter item which you'll recognise from any number of cars of the period, and also that view out the front. You can see that acreage of bonnet. In fact, as pointed out on the Grand Tour, the joke of this era of Mustang is that Ford decided they wanted the car bigger, so they simply made it bigger. The first foot of the car is essentially hollow. There's really little to nothing there. In good news, this does at least sound like a proper Mustang. And it drives very classic as well. I'm going to be extremely cautious about applications of the throttle here. But in all fairness, even if it were dry, I don't think I'd really be driving this car much faster than I am now. Oh, yeah. You got to know the road, really, with this kind of car. Yeah. 3-speed automatic gearbox. Very common fitment of the time, not particularly smooth. Yeah, muscle car! The funny thing with this kind of car, I would normally never slip and slide about in a car on a review, but the simple fact is that with this kind of weather, that sort of stuff happens at such a low speed, there's absolutely nothing scary about it whatsoever. And if you don't like a car spinning a wheel, this is really the wrong kind of car for you. So that engine, I believe this is a Ford Cleveland lump. Slightly earlier in the run, it had a different engine, I think a Windsor, which would have been the sort of thing you'd have found in a GT40, something like that. But the Cleveland then replaced it. They had the same capacity, 351 cubic inches, which is about 6.4 litres, and they put out a similar amount of power, which I think is just shy of 300. Torque, of course, then being relatively healthy, about 330, I think, in this particular car. Now, these were available with a couple of different setups. You could have either 2 or 4 Venturi carburetors. This car is what they call an M code, and that means it's the more powerful 4 Venturi setup. It's not particularly fast, of course it isn't. It's corners you got to watch out for, and this thing takes up all of the road and then some. But honestly, the Mustang is a car that really does seem to wear its heart on its sleeve. I have to confess, I much prefer it to say something like an old Ford Capri, even if a Ford Capri is definitely a car which is much better suited to this kind of road, being considerably narrower. Yeah, you don't really get a lot of idea as to what those front wheels are doing. Certainly not when conditions are like this, but again, are you really getting into a 1971 Mustang expecting it to be some sort of scalpel to dissect the back road of Britain? Because if you are, you're getting into the wrong car. Right, let's move that water around a bit. Yes, that's fine. Now, there is some room in the back, and this car is very comfortable. Again, cars are all about expectations, and with a piece of classic American metal, you're expecting it to be a little bit soft. Now, it's not seasick wallowy. I have been in a few cars which have done that, and this is not one of those. Oh, I just love that sound. Absolutely beautiful. Feels somewhat more refined and has a very, very different tone and character to the Oldsmobile I drove, which had a slightly larger engine, and that was a big block. I think this still qualifies as a small block. Pretty sure the Cleveland is a small block. Could be wrong. Not an expert on American muscle cars. Do please tell me. In here, the car does feel period correct, and I can't really see anything that would give away the fact that it was not originally a right-hand drive vehicle. America. Despite the low roofline, there is actually plenty of... Actually, no, take it back. There's not so much headroom in this car, but then this headliner is reasonably padded. The seats are very comfortable, and you have lap belts, and I think there is a sort of way of making them into a basic 3-point belt, although it's not particularly obvious from where I'm sitting. Must say, though, that the Mach 1 really is doing everything I sort of hoped that it might. Hey, 50 mile an hour, 55, 60. There you go. It's got absolutely no trouble whatsoever keeping up with modern traffic. We'll do that absolutely fine. And there's some really, really good news about classic American cars too. And this isn't something that's unique necessarily to the Mach 1 either. You see, American classic cars were made in vast numbers, much larger than many domestic British or European cars. That has quite a few key benefits. Number one, there are a lot more available, which means you've got many more to choose from, and they came in quite a few different configurations, so you can generally get more or less whatever you want. The Mach 1 was the performance-orientated version of this car, but if you're not so worried about that, you've got all sorts of other cars, including some 6-cylinders, that you can choose from too. It also means that there are many out there in good condition, and when there are many out there in good condition, that means that prices are always going to be more reasonable. And because many of them lived for a long time in America, there's a lot that are still reasonably original that haven't fallen apart. If they've lived in a dry state all their life, many of these cars have been cherished from the day that they were new, which means that you can still find them in decent nick. And because that's not an uncommon thing, that means that the prices are not silly. This car, 1971 Mach 1 Mustang, 64,000 original miles on the clock, right-hand drive converted from new, so I think that probably only adds to the value. In other cases, you could argue that it takes away from the originality, but in this car's case, it was part of the story. The original owner apparently had a Ford dealership, which is how he was able to acquire the car. Beautiful colour scheme too. This sort of forest green is absolutely delightful, and you've got the classic black vinyl interior. I would have thought, with the state of the classic market as it is, that this would be an expensive car. 50, 60,000 pounds seemed quite reasonable to me. No, 30 grand. And that to me, for a bona fide, serious, proper slice of American muscle, seems like something of a bargain. It really does. The classic car market has gone mad, and there are an awful lot of cars out there that I simply wouldn't pay that kind of money for. The prices people are asking for relatively humdrum vehicles, I think in many cases, are just mad. But this, no, I think £30,000 seems reasonable value. The chances are, by the time you see this video, that this car will have gone. But if you're interested in it, or something very much like it, please do give the guys a Retro Classic Car a call, because they've got a garage full of really cool stuff that is changing very quickly. I mean, even in the week that I've filmed all of the videos you're going to see from there, they've sold quite a few things and brought some new stuff in as well. I want to thank everyone for watching. My first experience of a classic Mustang has actually been rather pleasurable. So please like, comment below, subscribe, especially if you want to see a bit more of this, because there's going to be quite a bit to come, and I will see you all for the next one. Bye-bye. America!